The stars had always been quiet watchers. For millions of years they burned in silence, witnessing the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But that night the stars themselves seemed to tremble. From the edge of the void came a fleet so vast, so endless, that it darkened constellations and swallowed the light of distant suns. It was the Galactic Armada. For centuries, the Armada had been the symbol of ultimate power. It was not just a fleet, it was a moving empire, a storm of fire and steel. Every world that had stood against it had been crushed, their skies turned into fields of wreckage, their people forced to bow or perish. To the galaxy, resistance against the Armada was not bravery. It was foolishness. The council who commanded this fleet had ruled unchallenged for generations. Their arrogance was not born from words, but from history written in ash and ruin. Now their gaze had fallen on a small, fragile world, Earth. To the council, humanity was not a threat. In their records, humans were barely worthy of mention. A young species, limited in number, bound to a single planet. Their technology was primitive compared to the empires of the stars. And yet the Armada came in full force. Thousands upon thousands of ships, each one armed with enough firepower to level continents. Why bring such overwhelming might against such a small race? The answer was pride. The council did not fight wars because they had to. They fought wars to remind others of their dominance. When whispers began to spread in hidden corners of the galaxy, rumors of humans defying alien scouts, stories of human ships fighting back when others would run, the council grew restless. Pride demanded an answer. Pride demanded punishment. Pride demanded that Earth burn, not because it was dangerous, but because it dared to hope, and so the Armada came. When the first human satellites caught sight of the approaching fleet, panic spread faster than light. News stations screamed warnings, leaders gathered in underground chambers, and ordinary people looked at the night sky with dread, wondering if it would be the last time they saw it. Some prayed, some cursed, and some simply held their loved ones tighter. In every corner of Earth, fear became a shadow that touched every heart. How could humanity fight such a force? How could a single world stand against a storm that had drowned entire galaxies? But even in fear, there was something else. A spark. On military channels, voices spoke with defiance. Pilots volunteered. Engineers worked without rest. Families sent messages to those in uniform. Not of goodbye, but of faith. Humanity had always been small compared to the vastness of space, but it had never been empty of courage. Still, courage alone did not stop the Armada. The fleet drew closer. Ships larger than mountains drifted into orbit, blocking the light of the sun. Their weapons hummed with energy. Their shields shimmered like oceans of steel. Entire cities on Earth looked up and saw shadows pass over the sky. It was not just invasion, it was humiliation. The council wanted humans to see their doom before it came. In the grand chamber of the lead flagship, alien commanders spoke with laughter. To them, Earth was already theirs. One commander sneered that it would take less than an hour to bring humanity to its knees. Another joked that they might leave a small portion of the planet alive, as an example of mercy. But not one of them spoke of resistance. Not one of them believed humans had even a chance to raise a hand in defiance, and so the Armada prepared to strike. On Earth, silence hung heavy. Cities went dark as power grids were shut down to protect against the first wave. Families gathered in basements. Children asked questions no parent could answer, and soldiers stood ready in bunkers, knowing their weapons were like stones against thunder. Humanity had never felt so small, but it was in that silence, that deep breath before the storm, that something stirred. Far away from the surface, in the cold emptiness of orbit, a single ship powered up its engines. It was not new. It was not perfect. Its hull bore the scars of past battles, but in its heart burned something no alien commander could ever understand. It was called the UNS Resolute, and while the Armada believed Earth had already fallen, the Resolute was about to prove them wrong. The Resolute was not built for glory. It was not the kind of ship that legends were usually written about. Its metal skin carried dents from skirmishes. Its engines growled instead of purred. And some of its systems had been repaired so many times they no longer matched their original blueprints. To the Council, it was nothing more than a scrap relic. But to the humans who crewed it, the Resolute was more than steel. It was a promise. Inside, the air was heavy. The crew moved with urgency, their boots echoing against the narrow corridors. Each man and woman knew the truth. They were one ship against thousands. Logic said they had no chance. Numbers said they were already dead. And yet none of them stepped away. Captain Elias Kane stood at the command bridge, his eyes fixed on the giant wall of alien ships hovering just beyond the planet. He was a man who had seen war before, but never like this. His hands rested on the railing, steady though his heart carried the weight of every soul on Earth. He knew the galaxy thought humans were weak. He knew the Armada believed their victory was already written. That was why he refused to run. "All stations ready?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Engineering is stable," came the reply. "Weapons online. Shields at 30% power. That's all we've got," Kane nodded. 30% against thousands of warships. It was laughable. But no one laughed. The crew simply tightened their jaws and focused. They were not here to survive. They were here to stand. Across the bridge, a young officer whispered almost to herself, "They don't even know our names. They think we're nothing." Kane heard her. He turned, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Then let's remind them who we are." The Resolute moved forward. Its engines roared, a small flame against the vast cold of the Armada's presence. On Earth, millions watched through scattered transmissions. Their breaths caught as they saw it, the lone human ship rising to meet the invincible fleet. For a moment, the fear that gripped their hearts softened, replaced by something else. Hope. The Armada noticed the movement. Laughter filled their channels. Alien commanders mocked the foolishness of humanity. To them, the Resolute was not a threat, only a curiosity. Some even debated whether they should bother firing at it, or let it drift until it burned in the atmosphere. Their arrogance was as thick as the steel of their warships. But arrogance can be dangerous. The first message arrived. The Council broadcasted their demand to the human ship. Their voice was dripping with contempt. "This is your final moment. Surrender your vessel. Surrender your people. Kneel and we may spare a fragment of your world." Silence filled the bridge of the Resolute. The crew turned toward their captain. Kane leaned forward, eyes locked on the great fleet ahead. He pressed the comm switch and spoke, his voice carrying to every corner of the Armada. "Humanity kneels to no one." Those words spread across the channels like lightning. On Earth, people who heard them wept. In the fleet, alien commanders snarled in disbelief. A primitive species had dared to defy them? To speak as equals? The arrogance of humans, they thought, would be their last mistake. The Armada's ships began to move. Weapons charged, targeting systems locked. Energy surged across the dark sky. Thousands of cannons aimed at one fragile ship. The moment stretched, a heartbeat before destruction. But the Resolute did not wait. Its weapons roared. A single shot, carefully aimed, streaked across the void. It was not random. It was not desperate. It struck the alien flagship, an ancient vessel that had led countless victories. The shot pierced its shield, burrowed into its heart, and in a blinding explosion, the flagship shattered into fire and debris. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. On the bridge of the Resolute, no one moved. Their eyes widened as the impossible became real. One human ship, one fragile spark of defiance, had destroyed the heart of the Armada. On Earth, cheers erupted. People who had prepared for death screamed with joy, hugged each other and cried. For the first time, humanity saw that the invincible could bleed, but in the Armada, rage boiled. Their pride, built on centuries of victories, cracked in a single instant. No one dared laugh now. No one mocked. They finally understood. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was dangerous, and the war had only just begun. The explosion of the alien flagship still burned across the stars like a wound in the night. Pieces of its shattered hull drifted slowly, glowing embers in the void. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. For centuries, no one had seen such a sight. The fall of an Armada flagship. It was not supposed to happen. It was not even supposed to be possible. But it had happened. On Earth, people watched with disbelief. In homes, in bunkers, in hidden shelters, millions of humans stared at the sky or at flickering screens and saw the proof. The invincible could be broken. Their tears of fear turned into tears of wonder. Some fell to their knees, whispering prayers of thanks. Others shouted until their voices were raw. For a moment, humanity felt alive again. On the bridge of the Resolute, silence reigned. The crew stared at the wreckage, their own hearts racing. They had done the impossible. Yet no one celebrated. Every pair of eyes turned toward Captain Elias Kane, waiting. He stood tall, but inside he knew the truth. This victory was only the beginning. "They will come for us now," he said quietly. "All of them." And he was right. The Armada was no longer laughing. Across the fleet, alarms rang, orders were shouted, and weapons primed. The alien commanders were furious. Pride had been wounded, and pride demanded blood. They would not just destroy the Resolute, they would erase it, grind it into dust until no trace remained. Dozens of ships surged forward, forming a wall of fire. Their cannons lit the void, beams of energy slicing toward the lone human vessel. To face even one of those ships would have been madness. To face all of them at once was death itself. "Shields at maximum," shouted the tactical officer. The Resolute groaned as the first barrage struck. The ship shook violently, lights flickering, alarms screaming. Panels sparked, smoke filled the air, and still the crew held their ground. They were being torn apart, but they refused to break. "Return fire," Kane ordered. The Resolute answered. Its cannons roared, spitting defiance back at the wall of alien steel. Each shot was aimed with desperate precision, and each one carried the fury of an entire world. A cruiser fell, then another. Fire spread among the Armada ranks. But for every ship that fell, 10 more closed in. The crew worked as if their lives were already gone, as if every second was borrowed time. Engineers patched burning wires with their bare hands. Pilots twisted the ship through impossible maneuvers, weaving between blasts of energy that could split continents. On every face was fear, but behind it was something stronger. Determination. "Direct hit to port side," a voice shouted. The ship shuddered again. A hull breach opened, and 2 crew members were sucked into the void before the emergency shutters sealed. Their names would never be forgotten, but there was no time to grieve. The battle raged on. Inside the alien fleet, confusion grew. They had expected the human ship to fall in minutes, yet it still fought, still burned, still struck with the precision of a predator. Their commanders screamed for order, but fear crept into their voices. The Resolute was more than a ship. It had become a symbol. If one human vessel could defy the Armada, what else could humanity do? On Earth, transmissions of the battle spread like wildfire. People who had prepared for their end now screamed encouragement into the sky, as if their voices could reach the stars. Children painted the Resolute on walls. Elders prayed for its survival, and soldiers on the ground clenched their weapons tighter, ready to follow its example. Back in the fight, the Resolute danced among giants. Its engines burned, its hull cracked, but it never stopped. Captain Kane stood in silence for a moment, watching his crew fight with everything they had. His chest ached with pride. "We are not just fighting for survival," he said softly. We are fighting for the right to exist, for the right to be free." The words spread across the bridge, and though he had not shouted them, every ear heard, every heart understood. The Armada pressed harder. The void lit with endless fire, brighter than 1,000 suns. The Resolute spun, countered, endured. But even as it struck blow after blow, Kane knew they could not last forever. They were a single spark against a storm. Still, sparks can start fires. The Armada's pride was already broken, and no matter how the battle ended, the galaxy had seen something it would never forget. One human ship standing against the darkness, unafraid, and the echo of that first shot still burned across the stars. The stars were burning with war. The Armada stretched across the sky like a storm of iron, but something was changing in that storm. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most feared fleet hesitated. Their flagship was gone, their cruisers were falling, and all of it had been done by one human ship. The Resolute was still alive. Barely, but alive. Its hull bore deep scars, its shields flickered like dying flames, but its heart was unbroken. The crew fought as though every breath could be their last, yet every strike they made shook the enemy's pride. Inside the Armada, chaos spread. Commanders shouted conflicting orders. Some demanded immediate annihilation, others warned to proceed with caution. The death of the flagship had torn away the illusion of invincibility, and in its place grew something far more dangerous to them: doubt. On the Resolute, Captain Elias Kane felt that shift. He could not see into the minds of the enemy, but he could feel their hesitation in the rhythm of the battle. Their movements were less sharp, their formations less perfect. The Armada was bleeding not just metal but confidence. "Keep pressing," Kane ordered. "Every second we stand is another wound to their pride." The tactical officer, sweat streaking her brow, smiled through the chaos. "Then let's make them bleed fear." The Resolute struck again, piercing the side of a heavy cruiser. Fire erupted across its decks, and the giant alien vessel twisted, then fell apart. The humans cheered, their voices raw but full of power. For a heartbeat, it felt as though they were not just a small crew, but the voice of their entire species roaring through the stars. On Earth, the battle became legend in real time. Families huddled in darkness whispered the ship's name like a prayer. Soldiers clenched their fists, ready to fight with the same spirit. Children who had cried in fear now shouted with joy, pointing to the sky as if they could see the Resolute shining above. Humanity's heart beat in rhythm with that single ship, but the Armada was not defeated yet. Their pride was wounded, but their numbers were still overwhelming. Waves of ships advanced, surrounding the human vessel like wolves circling prey. Blasts of energy rained down, shaking the Resolute to its core. Panels burst, alarms screamed, and every crew member was thrown from their feet. "Starboard engines failing," one officer cried. "Shields at 5%, another shouted. The ship was breaking apart. The crew knew it. Kane knew it. But none of them stopped. "Divert all power to weapons," Kane commanded. His voice was calm, steady, even as the bridge quaked around him. "If we fall fighting." The crew obeyed without hesitation. The Resolute's cannons lit up once more, spitting fire into the darkness. A destroyer crumbled. A frigate exploded. Every shot carried the spirit of a people who refused to kneel. Among the Armada, whispers spread through their channels. How could one human ship withstand so much? How could a primitive race defy the Council's might? The answers did not matter. What mattered was that the questions were being asked at all. For centuries, no one had dared to imagine the Armada could lose. Now, even the thought of it spread like poison through their ranks. One alien commander, voice trembling with rage, spat into the comms, "They are only one ship. Why do they still fight? Why do they not die?" And another, Quieter, replied. Perhaps because they are human. The Resolute pushed through another line of ships, leaving wreckage in its wake. Its engines screamed, its weapons overheated, its shields failed completely. Yet it still moved, still fought, still lived. On the bridge, Kane looked at his crew, faces bruised, hands burned, uniforms torn. None of them looked ready to quit. They were exhausted, but in their eyes burned the same fire he had seen in humanity for generations. Survival against all odds. He spoke, not to command this time, but to remind them why they fought. We are one ship. They are thousands. But numbers do not decide history. Courage does. The words sank deep into their hearts. A silence followed, broken only by the ship's groans, but every soul on board felt stronger. They were more than a crew now. They were humanity's spear. As the Armada regrouped, preparing for another crushing wave, a strange quiet spread across the stars. For centuries, the Armada had advanced with arrogance, their pride unbroken. But here now, before a single human ship, that pride had shattered. And once pride is gone, fear takes its place. The Resolute was not just fighting a battle. It was rewriting the galaxy's story. The Resolute drifted through smoke and fire, its body torn but its heart still burning. Sparks danced across its broken panels. Alarms screamed like wounded voices, and the air inside smelled of metal and smoke. Yet the crew still moved. They were exhausted, bruised, bloodied, but they refused to stop. Every face on that ship told the same story. They knew death was close. They knew the Armada had thousands of ships left, and they were only one. But none of them surrendered to fear. Instead, they clung to something greater. Hope. Captain Elias Kane stood at the center of the bridge, steady despite the chaos. His uniform was scorched, a cut ran across his forehead, but his voice remained calm. He looked at his crew not as soldiers, but as family. We fight, he said softly, for Earth, for everyone watching us, for every child who still believes in tomorrow. The words settled over the bridge like a shield stronger than steel. A young pilot wiped blood from her lip and smiled. Then let's make tomorrow worth it. And so the Resolute kept fighting. The Armada unleashed wave after wave, desperate to crush the humans and erase their shame. Blasts of energy filled the void, streaks of fire brighter than lightning. Every hit tore another piece of the ship away. Whole sections of the hull groaned as if the ship itself were alive and screaming. But still it moved, still it struck back. Each human shot was like a spark against the storm. Yet those sparks lit fires inside the enemy. Cruisers fell, destroyers burned, and the mighty Armada began to look less like an endless tide and more like a fractured wall. On Earth, people clung to every transmission. Radios crackled with broken voices from the ship. Screens showed flashes of light in the sky. Entire cities held their breath, hearts beating with the rhythm of the Resolute's cannons. Mothers whispered to their children, "That's our ship." Fathers raised their fists, shouting at the heavens. And children, once crying in fear, now cheered so loudly their voices echoed through the shelters. The human spirit was rising, and the galaxy could feel it. In hidden corners of distant worlds, others watched too. Races long crushed under the Armada's rule saw the impossible unfolding before their eyes. Whispers spread like wildfire. A human ship stands against them. A human ship defies the Council. For some, it was the first taste of hope in centuries. But inside the Resolute, hope came at a terrible cost. Crew members fell at their stations, burned or crushed by exploding consoles. Medics dragged the wounded to the back of the ship, working with trembling hands. No one had time to mourn, no time to stop. Every death was a wound in the hearts of those left behind. Yet every death pushed the survivors to fight harder. "They will remember us," one dying engineer whispered, clutching the hand of his comrade. "Even if we don't make it, they'll remember." And his comrade, with tears streaming down her face, nodded. "We'll make sure of it." Captain Kane felt the weight of every loss, but he carried it with silent pride. He knew his crew was not superhuman. They were ordinary people facing the impossible. But that was what made them extraordinary. The aliens fought with power. Humans fought with love, for their world, their families, their very right to exist. The Armada's commanders, watching from their steel thrones, felt something they had not felt in centuries. Not just anger, not just humiliation, fear. For if one human ship could fight this hard, what would happen when more followed? The battle raged on. The Resolute spun through fire, its engines shrieking, its weapons glowing red from overuse. But each strike it delivered carried the voice of an entire species shouting into the void, "We will not bow." And still, Earth watched. Humanity's tears turned to strength, their fear to fury. Across the planet, people stood taller, no longer waiting for death but daring to dream of victory. The Armada had come to crush Earth's spirit. Instead, they had awakened it. The Resolute was more than a ship now. It was a symbol, a living reminder that even in the face of certain death, humanity would rise. And as long as the Resolute still breathed, so did hope. The battlefield had become a graveyard of fire. Alien ships burned in every direction, their wreckage drifting like broken bones across the stars. The Armada, once a wall of endless power, no longer looked unstoppable. Gaps opened in their formations. Commanders shouted in panic and hesitation spread like cracks in glass. And still, the Resolute lived. It was no longer the ship it had been at the start. Its hull was shattered, its shields were gone, and fires burned in its corridors. Whole sections of the vessel had gone dark. But its heart, the crew who refused to surrender, still beat with strength. Inside the bridge, smoke stung the eyes of every officer. Their hands shook from exhaustion. Their bodies screamed from wounds, but they held their stations as if the universe depended on it. And perhaps it did. Captain Elias Kane stood like a rock at the center. His voice was hoarse but steady. "We hold. As long as this ship breathes, we hold." The tactical officer looked at him with blood on her cheek and whispered, "How much longer can we fight?" Kane met her eyes, his own lined with fatigue, and answered, "Long enough." Outside, the Armada regrouped for another strike. But something had changed. They no longer advanced with confidence. Their movements were slower, scattered, their discipline cracking under the weight of fear. Every commander knew what they had seen. The invincible Armada had bled. And once blood is spilled, even giants begin to tremble. The Resolute roared forward again. Its weapons spat fire, tearing into another cruiser. Explosions rippled across the alien ship's surface until it split apart, scattering into glowing fragments. Another cheer rose from the humans, but it was weak now, heavy with exhaustion. Victory had not come yet. On Earth, billions still watched. Streets and shelters had fallen silent, all eyes locked on the battle above. Every time the Resolute struck, people cheered. Every time it staggered under fire, people gasped and prayed. Humanity's fate hung in the balance, and every heartbeat seemed to echo with the rhythm of the ship's guns. In the Armada's command, fury boiled. One alien general slammed his fist against the console, his voice cracking. "It is only one ship. End this now!" But another, quieter, trembled as he replied, "We have thrown everything at them, and they still fight. Do you not see? This is not just a ship. This is their soul." Fear grew heavier in their ranks. Pride had blinded them, but now their eyes were open. The humans were not weak. They were not prey. They were something far more dangerous, defiant. On the Resolute, the crew felt the shift too. They could sense the enemy's hesitation, taste the cracks in their will. Kane knew they had no chance to defeat the entire Armada, but that was never their mission. Their mission was to break the illusion, to show the galaxy the truth. The Armada could be resisted. "Target their command ships," Kane ordered. "Cut off their head and the body will scatter," the Resolute answered. Its cannons lit up, streaking through the void. A command frigate shuddered, then exploded in a violent storm of light. Alien voices cried out in confusion as their chain of command faltered. Ships collided in panic, formations fell apart. On Earth, the cheers shook the shelters. For the first time in history, humanity was not just surviving, they were winning. But victory had its price. Another barrage slammed into the Resolute. The ship screamed as metal tore and lights died. Entire decks were lost. The crew staggered, but none abandoned their posts. They fought with bleeding hands, whispered prayers and silent tears. Every soul on board knew this might be their last moment, but none were willing to let go. One officer, barely standing, whispered to his captain, "Even if we die here, we've already won." Kane placed a hand on the officer's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "No, we live, because Earth still needs us." The Armada faltered again. Their once perfect fleet was a storm of chaos now. Retreat signals clashing with attack orders. The proud commanders who had once laughed at the humans now felt the bitter taste of fear. Their pride was not only shattered, it was gone. And then for the first time silence spread across the stars. The Armada began to retreat. One ship turned, then another, and then hundreds broke away, pulling back from the battlefield. They had never retreated in living memory, but now they fled from a single human ship. On Earth, tears flowed freely. People embraced, screamed, and wept. The sight of the mighty Armada retreating was more than survival. It was a rebirth. Humanity was no longer prey. Humanity was no longer weak. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew collapsed into their seats, exhausted beyond measure. They were broken, bleeding, but alive. And as they watched the retreating fleet, they knew what they had done. They had changed history. The stars had gone quiet. The battlefield, once alive with fire and death, was now a graveyard of drifting wreckage. Alien ships retreated into the shadows, their formation broken, their pride scattered like ash on the wind. For the first time in countless ages, the Galactic Armada had fled. And at the center of it all, wounded but unbroken, drifted the Resolute. Its hull was torn open. Its engines coughed sparks, and whole sections of the ship were gone. But it still floated, scarred and alive. Inside, the crew slumped in their chairs, too exhausted to move, too stunned to believe what they had done. They had not only survived, they had forced the mightiest fleet in the galaxy to retreat. Captain Elias Kane stood at the cracked viewport. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. His crew had given everything. Many lay silent in the lower decks, their sacrifice now etched into the steel of the ship itself. Kane's chest ached with sorrow, but his eyes burned with pride. "Transmit to Earth," he said softly. His voice carried across the ruined bridge. "Let them know. Humanity stands." The signal went out, weak but clear, racing back to the planet below. On Earth, silence fell as the message arrived. Then the world erupted. People poured from shelters into the streets, crying, shouting, and embracing strangers. The Armada had not conquered them. A single human ship, bleeding and broken, had faced the storm and sent it crashing back into the void. Children chanted the name of the Resolute. Old men wept openly, their hands lifted to the skies. Families lit candles for those who had fallen, their light joining into rivers of flame across cities. The fear that had crushed humanity's spirit was gone. In its place burned something new, hope. But it wasn't only Earth that changed. Across the galaxy, countless species had watched the broadcast. Some in secret, hiding from the Armada's gaze, others openly stunned by what they saw. For generations they had whispered that resistance was impossible, that the Armada could never be opposed. But now those whispers turned into something stronger. "They bleed," said one alien elder to her people, "and if they bleed, they can be beaten." On distant worlds, rebel leaders straightened their backs. Prisoners in chains smiled for the first time in years. Hidden colonies began to stir, their hearts pounding with the possibility of freedom. The legend of the Resolute spread like fire in dry grass. The Armada itself fell into turmoil. Never before had they been forced to retreat. Their council chambers echoed with anger, shame, and fear. Commanders pointed fingers, demanding to know how one human ship had undone their pride. For the first time, cracks appeared in the unity of the mighty fleet. And deep inside, each of them carried the same poisoned thought. If the humans could do this, what might others achieve if they rose as well? Back on the Resolute, the crew prepared to return home. They were battered, broken, and carrying the memory of those who had given their lives. But as they set a course for Earth, a strange calm filled them. They knew their names would never be forgotten. One young officer, staring out at the stars, whispered, "Do you think they'll remember us, Captain?" Kane turned, his face lined with exhaustion and pride. "They'll remember all of you. Not as soldiers who fought a battle, but as the ones who lit the fire of freedom." When the Resolute entered Earth's orbit, the planet below erupted in celebration. Ships flew out to escort it home, sirens wailed in joy, and every city glowed with lights in honor of the crew. They were no longer just soldiers. They were symbols, living proof that humanity, no matter how small, could shake the universe. Years later, children would read of that day in history books. Poets would sing of the Resolute. Statues would rise not just on Earth, but across newly freed worlds. The phrase, "We stand resolute," became more than a motto. It became a promise, whispered by rebels, painted on walls, and shouted in the face of tyrants. And though Captain Kane and his crew carried scars that never healed, they walked with their heads high. They had faced the unstoppable. They had given everything, and in return they had changed the galaxy forever. The Armada had advanced with pride, certain of their victory, but one human ship had shattered that pride in seconds. And in that silence after the storm, a new truth was born. Humanity was not prey, not weak, not broken. Humanity was resolute.